And God said, "Let there be
The
light."
Lord says, "Let my people go."
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
This is the Talkin' Bible podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Talkin' Bible. We're continuing our journey with Jeannie through some pretty challenging passages. Journey with Jeannie. Well, journey with Jesus and Jeannie. How about that?
Dear, I don't know. One of us is good, the other one is not good.
Work in progress.
Yes.
We're all a work in progress, and we are talking about what it means to be a disciple this week. It just so happens that these are some challenging passages in this week's episodes. Around relationships, around attitude towards money, around Jesus being Lord, about the cost of discipleship, what it means to ultimately follow Jesus, and there's a cost attached to that in most of these passages we happen to be looking at. And today we're talking about this little parable Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount, and he gives it in Luke as well, probably in different context. You might go there, we'll see, but he's really talking about the cost of, what it'll cost you to actually make reconciliation with your adversary, he says, or the person who's against you or you're against.
Yes, yeah. Or your neighbour. You can throw it in there.
Or your neighbour, yep.
Think of it as your neighbour.
Yes.
And I have to ask myself, why did I pick this week? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I sat down to rehearse these this morning and look at these, and I went, wow, these are some pretty challenging verses. It's not unusual to have one or two of these scattered through, but to have basically a whole week of these is quite substantial.
That's right, yeah. Hopefully people will grow this week.
Hopefully
or be
so.
challenged.
Well, I know the theme that we're doing in church around this is one another. So these are all really one another kind of scriptures. They're deeply linked to what it means to have a relationship with God, requires us to have a relationship with each other and what that might look like.
Yeah, and this one really makes me think, because why would Jesus say this and what's it really about? And he says in verse 25 in Matthew, reach a settlement quickly with your adversary while you're on the way with him to the court, or your adversary will hand you over to the judge and the judge to the officer, and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penny. And that's it. That's all we're supposed to be talking about this week.
So if you take that without any context, you're going to make it say whatever you want it to say. Jesus, does this only apply to people who, have someone who's making a civil claim against them? Is that what Jesus is saying? I think it's got to be more than that. I don't know. No one's ever made a civil claim against me, so I could just dismiss these verses. It's got to be more than that.
Well, I read it as somebody's made. Oh, no, I don't know. No. Let me rethink this.
Okay.
To me, this sounds like you have a problem with your neighbour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's been going on for a long, long time. And you're on the way to court and you should settle with your neighbour.
Yes.
You should take whatever is offered to you so that you don't end up in prison because you're in court, because eventually you're just going to end up in prison anyway, because it's not going to go your way.
That seems to be what it's saying, yeah.
Yes. You are not going to win this situation.
You're not going to win this situation. It's beyond you to win this situation. And yet, presumably, you could go to court and you could win the case. Or presumably you could go to court and get more than what you're being offered if you didn't go to court.
Well, that's why you want to go to
That's
court.
why people go to court, because they think the settlement's not enough. I'm going to get more.
But Jesus is pretty clear. He says you will never get out of there until you've paid the last penny.
So that can't be talking about an actual situation, because sometimes they would lose everything and end up in jail, because back in those days, that's how it worked. The way the court system worked is that when a civil claim of one person against another was brought before a Roman court, invariably what would happen is the person would be told, well, you need to get thrown into jail until you repay it, which ironically meant that sometimes they'd be in jail for life, because when you're in jail, someone else is going to have to earn the money to pay for it. So that was the way the Roman system worked.
But that's very different to our system.
Different to our system.
So how should we read this?
So we need to put it in its context then. What's Jesus talking about? Why is he using this story? And I think he would be talking about, let's face it, you might go to court and you might win something, but what does it cost you in relationship with that person in the process of winning that claim? And I would imagine it'd be very rare that you'd come out winning a case in a civil court and be on better terms with the person who's just been ordered to pay you money. That wouldn't happen.
That is true, yes.
That wouldn't happen. So in the context of relationships, and if you look at Matthew's gospel, he is putting it in the context of the conversation around anger. You've heard that it was said, be angry with it, whatever it is. You do not be angry. Where are we? Matthew chapter 5. Let me see if I can find the context of it immediately before. You've heard it was said of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But everyone who is angry with their brother is liable to judgment. So Jesus is elevating the bar on relational anger here. And he's using this story to say, if you get so embittered and so angry that it's like you're going to drag that person through the courts to get your way and get everything you deserve, that's going to cost you everything. And who knows, you might actually get there and find that you're the one at fault, and then you've lost even more.
Yeah, and what's that saying? If you roll around in mud with your neighbour, you both get muddy.
Get muddy. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Good analogy. Yep. And I think that's probably what Jesus is trying to get at here, is that it's just it's good to rethink your need to be right all the time. Your anger at how you've been mistreated, do not let that become all encompassing just so you can have your day in court. That is not healthy for you or for your neighbor. It's not kingdom living, is what Jesus is trying to say. Far better to find a way to bring reconciliation. Do whatever you can to bring reconciliation before you get there. Or it might cost you everything. You might win the court case, but you've still lost everything in God's eyes, because you've won the case because of your anger. You've got your way. The other person is suppressed. You've pushed down your wife who you're angry with, and you've gotten angry. You pushed her down, and you feel better about yourself. Jesus says, what was all that about? That wasn't the kingdom living. You've just suppressed your wife. You've just been abusive. So what if you're right? Jesus' upside down kingdom is, wouldn't you rather just give up some rights for the sake of peace?
Why does Jesus care so much about reconciliation?
It's kingdom. It's the breakdown in relationships it begins in Genesis 3 between Adam and Eve. And it's the first and most prevalent result of sin. All sin leads to breakdown in relationships. The moment I choose for myself at the expense of someone else, I've severed that relationship. So it is the first fruit, the bad fruit of sin. And so the Bible as a whole is on that journey back. Righteousness, the concept of righteousness is about having right relationships with God and right relationships with people. You cannot have one without the other.
Sorry, say that again.
You cannot have a right relationship with God and not be in right relationships with people. Jesus is essentially saying here, if I'm going to say, me and Jesus, we're great, we have a great relationship with the Father, but I am at odds with that person, with my neighbor, and I am angry towards that neighbor, and I am contending to be right, to have my rights upheld with that neighbor, I have severed my relationship with God in that process, because out of that must flow this way. It must be an upward vertical flow of love and a horizontal flow of love to my neighbor as well. And that's the kingdom is all about that. God's purpose for coming to earth was to restore humanity to its original intention, which was right relationship with our neighbor and right relationship with God.
Are those verses where Jesus says, if you have a problem with your brother or sister, go and reconcile with your brother or sister before you come and worship me? Is that just before this?
It must be somewhere in Matthew chapter 6. I think it's probably Matthew 6 from the top of my head.
Oh, really? So it's after that? Because that feels like that's a natural connection.
The attitude, the Sermon on the Mount is all over relationships. I mean, that's so much of what the Sermon on the Mount is about, is the way you relate to other people. I mean, I'm just looking at the subtopics in Matthew 5. Anger, lust, divorce, oaths, retaliation. I mean, every one of those things, loving your enemies, these are all relational contexts. So the Christian life exists. Giving to the needy, he goes on and talks about. So they're all about relational context. You cannot have a Christian life without those things. And it is I think it's in the Sermon on the Mount. If you remember that your brother has something against you, if you leave your gift on the altar,
go and settle it. It seems to me that there's something about your heart that Jesus is trying to address here. That if you haven't reconciled with somebody or you haven't settled with somebody, your heart is still in an incorrect place. Yeah. That your heart needs to be worked on. Yep. And
it goes so far as to say this is at least 1/3 to 1/2 of the Sermon on the Mount. So that tells me it's reasonably important that we do this.
Yeah, okay, but it's really hard. It's hard to settle because you're giving away, or you don't want to settle because you want to win.
The sinful nature wants to win, and this is what Jesus wants us to overcome: is that sinful nature. The Apostle Paul, he kind of speaks against the Corinthians for having this same problem. They actually were taking one another to court. That's what they were doing. They were having civil disputes in front of the courts, and Paul's going, how is it that you can do this? He said, you're giving Christ a bad name in the Roman courts because you brothers are taking each other to court in front of secular courts and over over civil matters that you should be able to figure out yourselves. Now, just a caveat there. That is not saying that Christians should never go to court. God has got a justice. If there's been criminal matters, they need to be sorted out through our judicial system. We do not handle criminal matters in-house. Churches have tried to do that. That is wrong. So that's not what we're talking about here. But Jesus and Paul is talking about these matters that are about selfishness of the heart, not justice. I want my way. Paul's going, forget your way. Live for something bigger than that. Be prepared to give up your rights for the sake of others, for the sake of unity, for the sake of peace. That's what Paul's talking about.
Yeah, well, it doesn't sound like he's talking about anything criminal here.
No,
in these verses. It's
this is a civil matter.
It's something that, a civil,
some kind of dispute about, your cow was eaten by my animal and whatever. That sort of thing is what we're talking about here. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. When I was reading this, it made me think of a family that I know who one of their neighbours is quite aggressive and poisons plants and chops down fences and
that's what he's talking about.
Does all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But the family that I am friends with, they just don't even react. They'll go plant some more plants, but a little bit further away from the fence. Yeah, they'll speak amicably to their neighbour and Christmas
that's what
presents
I'm talking about.
and
That's what
things.
Jesus is talking about.
Yeah, and I was really
Convicted.
Wes,
Me too.
Thinking about that. Yes,
That's the love, upside down love of God that you're describing your friends having there. That's what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah,
and it doesn't guarantee peace. And Paul says in Romans, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with all people. It's not guaranteeing you will, but it's making sure that your heart is okay. You're not embittered. I mean, I don't know these people you're talking about, but I imagine it's not easy to do that. But I imagine it's less consuming than it would be to be constantly engaged in giving their mental power to these neighbours who are poisoning their plants all the time. I mean, that would be all consuming.
Yeah, and they laugh about it.
Yeah.
But another thing in conversation with them is, you imagine how bad that issue would get
if it escalated.
If they pushed back.
Yep. Proverbs says a soft answer turns away wrath.
Yeah, it's not worth it to them.
No.
They've got problems in their own life, Yeah. Why bother?
Why bother? And intuitively we know this because that makes sense, but our sinful nature wants to be right and wants to exacerbate problems. And this is what Jesus is inviting us into is don't live that way, folks. Don't let your anger... what Jesus is saying in the context of you've heard that it was said do not commit murder, but anger is murder in the heart, is he is saying murder, war begins with anger. That's where it begins.
Yeah, it does. Well, with resentment, bitterness.
Bitterness, yeah, that's right. Those kind of emotions that come from some kind of offence.
A feeling of not being respected.
Yes.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
That's right.
Another way I read this, I just want to throw it in there, is this must be the childhood church upbringing that I had when I read it. Reach a settlement quickly with your adversary. I was like, oh, that's got to be the devil. Okay. The adversary is the devil. He's taking me to court. He's accusing me of things in front of Jesus. So I have to settle, not necessarily with him, but I have to settle with Jesus, to be forgiven and all of that. Otherwise, because I'm going to be thrown into prison. That
sounds like a very Hellfire and Baptist version, Hellfire and Brimstone Baptist version of preaching that. I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about.
That's one way I read it.
Yeah.
I better,
I'm sure you'd find some scholars that agree with that too. But that's, while nothing you said there is wrong, I think to build that argument out of this passage is to just totally butcher what Jesus was really trying to make, the point he was trying to make.
But if you take it out of context,
you can make it say that.
And that's when I read it. I thought, oh, but because there's so many, a lot of the language is similar to other things.
The term adversary there, which elsewhere refers to the devil. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. But that's not what Jesus is talking about.
Just that I'd throw that in there. So who's Jesus to you in this moment?
Oh, let me think. I didn't think about it for this one. Who is Jesus for me in this passage? How about we go with Jesus is the Prince of Peace?
Oh, that's a good thought.
Because the Prince of Peace means the principle, or the author of peace. We get the word principle or first of peace from. So here is Jesus, the Prince of Peace, the one who comes to bring peace, showing us the way that if we will follow, that we too can live at peace and not live with anger or hatred towards others.
That's good. To me, it was like Jesus is showing here just how active he can be and should be in your life as a disciple.
I like that too. Yeah.
Because often he says things, love your enemies, and you think, what does that actually mean? And you walk away and you consider it. But this one is a direct statement.
Tangibility about it.
Yes.
Yes, true. Good point. And that links in with what I was saying earlier in the week around letting Jesus we're the steward and he's the owner and he's the Lord of our life, because it's a good example. How do I deal with my neighbor who's poisoning my plants? Lord, my life is your life. What am I going to do? How would you respond? And that's a good example of it. That's making him the Lord, the Prince of Peace, the first. I like it, Jeannie.
Yeah, this is a clear way of how you should live your life as a Christian.
Yep, and
as a disciple.
And there's a tangibility, a little bit like how we interpret. Earlier in the year, I talked about interpreting the law. You take the law and you go, what's the context? What does it teach us about our behavior? What can we observe about human behavior? What can we discern about God's will, and how can we embody that? These few verses in this little parable here about going to court, same thing. What is it showing us about human nature? What is it showing us about the way God wants us to respond? And how do I embody that in my relationship with my neighbor? That's how to apply God's word into everyday life.
Yeah, right. And it sounds like he's very personal.
Deeply involved.
He's involved in your life, no matter if you like it or not.
Yes, whether we like it or not. This is true. All right, enough for today?
Yeah, yes.
All right, thanks everyone. Talk to you next episode.